Grove, Hagman, Halderman, Hall, Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Waso, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Lara, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mansour, Mendoza, Miller, Mitchell, Monning, Morrell, Nistande, Nielsen, Norby, Olson, Pan, Perea, V. Manuel Perez, Portantino, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Swanson, Torres, Valadeo, Wagner, Wykowski, Williams, Yamada, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. We ask Assembly Member Steve Bradford to offer the day's prayer.
Dear Father, during these difficult times, give us the ability and the will to act with a rightful purpose. Let us remember that our duty is to serve not only our state and residents, but also to serve our God in a manner that does us honor individually and as a body. May Jesus, in Jesus' name, amen.
We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Please join Assembly Member Brownlee as she leads us in the pledge. Miss Brownlee. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Monday, June 23, 2011. The Assembly met at noon. Honorable Fiona Moss, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Guard E. Dawson Wilson at the desk. Reading clerk Timothy Moreland reading. The roll was called. Ashaji, Alejo, Allen, Amiano, Atkins, Bell, Berryhill, Block, Blumenfield, Bradford, Brownlee, Buchanan, Butler, Calderon, Campos, Carter, Cedillo, Chesbro, Conway, Cook, Davis, Dickinson, Donnelly, Ying, Fear, Fong, Fuentes, Furtani, Gaines, Gaggiani, Garrett, Gatto, Gordon, Grove, Hagman, Hall, Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Waso, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mansour, Mendoza, Miller, Mitchell, Monning, Morel, Nasande, Nielsen, Norby, Olsen, Pan, Perea, V. Manuel, Perez, Portantino, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Swanson, Torres, Valadeo, Wagner, Wykowski, Williams, Yamada. Mr. Speaker, at 223, Honorable John A. Perez. 46, persistent and presiding. By unanimous consent, the regular business of the Assembly was dispensed with for the legislative day. By unanimous consent, the following day, the Assembly members were granted leaves of absence for the day on personal business and waiting per diem. Assembly member Bonilla, Fletcher, and Lara on active military.
Mr. Calderon moves and Ms. Conway seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read. Amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Rule 45.5 to allow Assemblymember Lowenthal to speak on adjourned memory.
Without objection.
Also request unanimous consent to suspend Joint Rule 62A to allow the Veterans Affairs Committee to meet and to hear the following bills on Wednesday, June 29 at 10 a.m. in room 444. That's SB 10, SB 180, SB 537, SB 813.
Without objection, clerk will note.
Also, pursuant to Rule 96, request unanimous consent to refer the following bill to committee, SB 682 Rubio, from the Natural Resources Committee to the Rules Committee.
Without objection.
And pursuant to Assembly Rule 79, and at the request of the author, I request unanimous consent to recall AB 332 by Ms. Butler and AB 122 by Mr. Gatto from engrossing and enrolling and return them to the Senate for further action.
Without objection, those bills are withdrawn from engrossing and enrolling.
What's that? And finally, Madam Speaker and members, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 96 and to suspend Assembly Rule 63 to withdraw the following bills from Budget Committees so that Mr. Blumenthal can then take them up without reference to file for purposes of third reading today. The bills are SB 87, SB 89, SB 92, and SB 73.
Okay, without objection, Mr. Calderon, if you could reread the bills to be withdrawn from.
Just clarify.
Clarify. It's AB 1222.
Not AB 122.
Not AB 122. From engrossing and enrolling.
Yeah, AB 1222. Is that the Gatto bill? Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I.
Mr. Calderon.
Oh, it was? Okay. Well, so much for my original script. Okay, you granted my motion with respect to SB 87, 89, 92, and 73. Withdraw from committee and to take them up without reference to file today.
Without objection. Okay, members, the first bill we're going to take up is SB 87, without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 87 by Senator Leno, an act making an appropriation for the support of the government of the state of California to take effect immediately.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Madam Speaker, members, as the old saying goes, the third time's a charm. And so with that in mind, we will take up this year's third package of budget bills, 8 in total, to conclude our 6 months' worth of work on the state budget. As a result of our actions today, in tandem with the budget votes taken in March and a couple of weeks ago, we will have closed $26.6 billion of budget gap with a responsible budget plan that will be in place on time before the end of this fiscal year. This plan relies primarily on cuts, brutal cuts, which place me and many others well outside of our comfort zones. The governor challenged us to act in this fashion, and over these past months, the majority of members have delivered for the greater good. These cuts will forever haunt our consciousness. However, those of us who do vote for this budget may take comfort with the knowledge that we did what is necessary to move us towards stability, something that is ultimately in the best interest of every Californian. This plan has a reserve of $513 million and eliminates 75% of our ongoing structural deficit. 75% of our ongoing structural deficit. It aggressively moves toward long-term financial gains, but you don't need to take my word for it. Treasurer Lockyer said earlier today that this budget is financeable and represents a necessary, important step to moving California to good financial health. The budget bill before us is a serious budget for a serious time, but it is necessary to put California on path to stability, which is exactly what families and businesses have long said they need to build for a more prosperous future. This budget is our backup plan. It's not the fair and balanced approach the governor and most in this chamber preferred. This plan is best described as making the best out of a bad situation. It's real. We are governing, and we stand united with the governor in making some very difficult but necessary choices about our priorities. This budget prioritizes K-12 education. It funds programmatic education at current levels, the same level as it was in the budget just a couple of weeks ago. This budget prioritizes jobs and our fragile economic recovery. We have a trigger mechanism built into the budget accounting for the encouraging fact that our revenues continue to grow above expectations. Our economy is improving. Let's not put more roadblocks in front of that. We have made a conservative estimate that the state will receive $4 billion of additional revenues by this December. If this does not happen, then we face a series of very serious triggered cuts. This budget prioritizes innovation in government through fully funding the governor's public safety realignment proposal. And if there were ever an example of a failed program in dire need of reforms to shake things up, it's our correctional system. A 60% recidivism rate is unacceptable. We can and we will do better through realignment. The proposals we have already approved and will vote on today will ensure that local governments have the money they need to take on this responsibility and use it to improve performance and results. While the funding sources for realignment will be codified in law, we will have preferred an airtight constitutional protection. But the votes didn't materialize for that prospect. Finally, this budget prioritizes the operation of our partners in government, schools, businesses, and local governments that rely on the state paying its bills on time. This budget maintains a basic framework of stability that they need to move forward. And with that, I ask for your aye vote on SB 87.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. First of all, I would like to commend my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for making more cuts. And I know that it's tough to make the cuts. But it is nice to see that some of the taxes have been removed from this budget, some of the illegal taxes that would have wound up in court. But there's something missing. There's something that I think all of us could agree on. I love the idea that there's $4 billion in revenue that are going to come from somewhere. But you know what? I don't think that it's enough for us just to trust and hope that those revenues materialize. I think we need to make it our business over the next few weeks and months to roll up our sleeves and come up with a checklist to fill in the blanks of the buzzwords that we hear all around this place: regulatory reform, pension reform, all these kinds of things. Why don't we actually come up with a checklist one by one by one? Come up with 3 items, 4 items, 10 items that we can agree on in a bipartisan way so that we can put people back to work. We don't need a bridge to more taxes, but it would be great to have a bridge to more jobs when we have 2.5 million Californians out of work. I've got a suggestion of a couple. We ought to start with the bus and truck regulation that is killing people that use trucks. I've got one company that's spending $3 million retrofitting trucks that don't need to be replaced. That's $3 million they could be using to expand, to grow, and to actually hire people. We get those folks back to work. That's money that will immediately accrue to our revenues for the state of California, and I think that's something that we can get excited on both sides of the aisle. 40-hour work week. Come on, what's so complicated about that? That gives companies flexibility. There's a bunch of simple regulations like that. I guarantee you might have a few. You've got a few over here. Let's put them together and let's figure out and let's take it seriously that these revenues can actually be stimulated by our actions in this body when we send out a signal that California is open for business. So I applaud my colleagues for taking out the illegal taxes. I applaud my colleagues for making tough cuts. Let's work hard. Let's work together to put California back to work and restore our economy and make this the Golden State once again.
Mr. Nielsen.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, this is a budget that's been hard to wrought, come along in a clumsy manner, with a lot of errors along the way. It is before us tonight, and by a majority it will likely pass. It does not solve our problem in the long run. There are no sustaining reforms that are critical and will have to come heretofore if we are ever going to get this budget under control. It is a grudging recognition that $58 billion in tax increases imposed on our citizens were not required to take this next step in our budget, but is woefully short on reforms. There's some creative work in here, creative in terms of determining how much new money may be available, and finance is magnificently capable of understating and overstating, and I trust that they've well overstated in this particular case. Public safety is absolutely egregiously compromised and not reformed, and I will not debate that any further here tonight. That will come later in stories in the newspapers that will all have you pointing your fingers and your citizens being outraged. It does represent a 27% increase over the next 3 years in spending by the governor's own recognition. And the cuts that have been painfully taken are temporary cuts, not sustaining cuts, and no way can be assured that those will remain reduced budgets. And further, the business of the agency of the state of California have not changed not one whit over the last 2 years for the reductions in the budget that have occurred. You ask the citizens that you represent if those agencies are any less onerous, arbitrary, capricious, free to raise and apply fees and in broader ways. No changes in that way. A little slip in here for CDCR, again, the most particularly overspending agency in state government, a $369 million shortfall for their overspending, not a shortfall for the underfunding, as they would like to say, or finance wants to claim. So we're letting CDCR go its merry way. In fact, in its merry way, it's going to cost the citizens that we represent very dearly. And that's the sorriest product of this budget that does deserve a no vote.
Ms. Grove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This bill is about $1.3 billion more than the governor's January budget. $1.3 billion more than the January budget. This package doesn't include any structural or enough structural reductions to solve the state's perpetual deficit. The numbers don't lie. This budget sets the state up for big government spending growth, plain and simple. According to the governor, like Mr. Nielsen said, 27% an increase over big government spending. That's a figure that's likely low because of the gimmicks and one-time solutions. The headlines on a daily basis, every newspaper you pick up talks about six-figure pension issues and people taking advantage of our public employee pension systems. And this budget doesn't address any of those issues. It throws the elderly, kids, students, all these people under the bus. But, you know, I thought about it when I made the comment the last time we ran the budget around, and I thought, wow, those people don't make campaign contributions, so that's probably why they're getting thrown under the bus. I voted no the last time on these cuts for individuals like that, and I intend to vote no this time. And I would ask that you also look at every business group, large and small, that's publicly called for regulatory reform so that we can generate revenue through job creation in this state. And you guys continue to pass regulatory issues that continue to hinder business from employing people in the state of California. And that should be the #1 priority of this legislature, is putting people back to work in non-taxpayer funded private sector jobs. So I would ask that you vote no on this.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
Just a few responses to some of the comments I have, and I'll try to keep it brief. But certainly the last comments about no structural deficit is just patently false. And at the same time, to complain about cuts is sort of beyond understanding. I don't even know how to address that when, on the one hand, you complain that we're making cuts that are too difficult to make, and on the other hand, you're saying we're not making any cuts and no structural deficit. That is a logic that is just completely broken. And I guess I won't even go further than that. Just to say, look at the facts. We have done 75% of the structural deficit is dealt with in this budget. That is an incredible feat of which we should be very proud of. The painful cuts in this budget are a result not of wanting to throw folks under the bus, but it's a result of the fact that we have not been able to get a consensus, a two-thirds consensus around revenues. And that there are not other great solutions that are out there. And we've talked about, you know, other solutions, trying to bring other solutions to the table, and we'd like to see real solutions. When you talk about, other colleagues talked about policy changes that they'd like to see made in the future, that's great. We have a policy process, and we need to work on policy changes. It's nice to recognize that we shouldn't be trying to shoehorn every policy change into the budget that we can't get votes for. The point of the budget is to balance our budget, not to get all of our policy ideas in. But I'd like to work with all the members on both sides of the aisle on policy changes in terms of some of the issues that we've talked about in regulatory reform and dealing with the big structural problems. I'm genuine about that. I know a lot of folks are genuine about that. I know we can move forward on that. And then some of the first comments about, you know, we shouldn't just rely on trust and hope. We're not. This budget specifically has triggered cuts in it. Triggered cuts that are very real and very painful. And so if you can't have it both ways. You can't say that the numbers are not real, the $4 billion is not real, and at the same time say the triggered cuts are not, you know, therefore we're not going to have any cuts. If the numbers are not real, we're going to have these triggered cuts. I think the numbers are real, and I hope and I pray that we don't have these triggered cuts. But this is a very real budget. And with that, I ask for your aye vote, and I ask if it is passed for immediate transmittal to the governor.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 25. Measure passes. Mr. Blumenfield asks for immediate transmittal to the Senate. Without objection. File item SB 89 without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 89 by the Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to vehicles and making an appropriation therefore to take effect immediately. Bill related to the budget.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, SB 89 adjusts the allocation of costs for the Department of Motor Vehicles administrative expenses and shifts vehicle license fee revenue to support the realignment of public safety activities. The end result is over $450 million in resources for public safety realignment. This bill has two financial components. First, it substantially adjusts the cost-sharing arrangement of DMV's administrative costs. DMV costs are currently borne disproportionate by the vehicle license fee. By changing the cost-sharing to reflect the actual distribution of DMV costs, this bill frees up $300 million to support the realignment of certain local public safety activities. Second, the bill redirects $153 million in vehicle license fee revenues that currently flow to cities and counties to the Local Revenue Fund 2011 to support local public safety services. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 24. Measure passes. Mr. Blumenfield requests immediate transmittal to the Senate. Bill SB 92 without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 92 by Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to public safety and making an appropriation therefore to take effect immediately. Bill related to the budget.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, SB 92 is the public safety trailer bill which contains numerous provisions necessary to implement the 2011-2012 budget. This is not realignment. This bill deals with the small provisions other than realignment. This bill will enable our provision health care system to sign up eligible inmates for Medi-Cal for the purposes of drawing down federal funds. It creates the Board of State and Community Corrections beginning on January 1, 2012, to provide a forum for state and local criminal justice stakeholders to provide leadership, coordination, and research expertise in the state local correctional system. Finally, this bill also removes peace officer status from employees of the Office of Inspector General. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 26. Measure passes. Mr. Blumenfield requests immediate transmittal to the Senate. And SB 73 without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 73 by Senate Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, an act relating to Health and Human Services and making an appropriation therefore to take effect immediately. Bill related to the budget.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, SB 73 contains the trigger for mid-year reductions to Health and Human Services. These triggered cuts take effect only if our revenue forecast projections fall below $87.4 billion by January 1st. These cuts total $215 million, including a $15 million trigger reduction to Medi-Cal, a $100 million trigger reduction to IHSS, a $100 million trigger reduction to the Department of Developmental Services. The prospect of these cuts that are decidedly among the most severe, is an awful, awful thought. They will inflict great pain and suffering on vulnerable Californians. Unfortunately, our hand has been forced. We don't have the needed votes for revenue extensions, and we can't provide services with money that we do not have. We have cause for hope that these cuts will not be triggered. As I've said, our economy is beating revenue projections with each day. Simply put, these cuts will not take effect if revenues exceed the May revision by $3 billion. The trigger is real. However, it could be prevented by revenue growth, or it can always be prevented by closing a tax loophole in the future to gain future revenue. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. And all members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 26. Measure passes. Mr. Blumenfield requests immediate transmittal to the Senate. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I move to waive the one-day wait period so that we can hear ABs 118, AB 117, and AB 121. Also, I want to waive unanimous consent to waive Rule 77 so Mr. Blumenfield can take up those bills for concurrence and Senate amendments without reference to file today.
Without objection. Okay, AB 118, without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 118 by Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to local government finance and making appropriation, therefore to take effect immediately. Bill related to the budget.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, AB 118 implements the Governor's 2011 Public Safety Realignment Proposal. It provides the statutory framework for realignment, revenue allocation methodology, and most of the revenues needed for the $5.6 billion in realignment services. More specifically, this bill defines specific public safety programs as local responsibilities for nearly $5.6 billion in budget savings. This bill also generates $5.1 billion in realignment revenues through the dedication of a 1.0625% of existing state sales use taxes to pay for realignment. These funds will go into the newly created Local Revenue Fund, which is prescribed accounts dedicated to the activities subject to realignment. When combined with SB 89 or AB 108, this bill provides for all costs of realignment. Members, California has a gigantic, expensive state corrections system that has failed on many levels. All the while, prisons continue to suck up scarce general fund dollars. For all we spend on corrections, we should expect and we deserve more and better results. We can't tinker around the edges and call it reform. We need to think big. That's what this bill does. It's the first part in a process of thinking big. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Nielsen.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, if you voted for Prop 109, you made a big mistake. If you vote for this, you're compounding it many times over because you are funding that public safety disaster, an egregious and gross injustice. The citizens of California deserve more. This certainly deserves a no vote.
Mr. Solorio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This bill is connected to a prior bill, SB 89, and I do rise with a little bit of concern. I'm sure some of my other Orange County legislative members are also concerned that there's $48 million take from some VLF dollars that currently go towards Orange County that relate to some financing debts related to the bankruptcies from some time ago. I've raised this concern with Speaker Perez and our budget staff, and I'm looking that we have a fix in the very near future to address this issue of $48 million that impacts public safety funds to Orange County, as well as some community clinic funds. Just want to put that on the record and indicate that I'm working with Speaker Perez and budget staff on this. With that commitment to working on this, I will be supporting this bill today as well.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
So I respect the comments of my colleagues. We have a lot of work to do on continued in the Corrections Department. This, I think, is an important first step and a big way of thinking, a big change in the way that we've been thinking about corrections, and I ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 27. Measure passes. Mr. Speaker requests immediate transmittal to the Governor. AB 117, clerk will read, without reference to file.
Assembly Bill 117 by Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to criminal justice realignment, making appropriation therefore to take effect immediately. Bill related to the budget.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, AB 117 provides technical cleanup to a bill we passed in March, AB 109, which transferred custody of low-level offenders to counties from the state. More specifically, this bill does several things. It provides many technical provisions to clarify how and when this transfer is appropriate. It includes changes to conform AB 109 to the latest public safety realignment package. In this context, this bill excludes specific felonies from realignment. And third, it delays the operative date of realignment. In the case of crimes subject to realignment, this bill delays the operative date from July 1 to October 1 of this year. In the case of courts assuming jurisdiction concerning felonies subject to post-prison supervision, this bill delays the operative date from July 1 of this year to July 1, 2013. I've long said the governor has asked us to think big and make transformative change to our public safety system through realignment. This is a chance to help reform a broken system so Californians can get more public safety for less money. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Nielsen.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, it's best said here to not amend a bad bill. This bill was unconstitutional. 109 was when it went around the first time. You're coming around the second time. There are still going to be legal problems. I will even be participating in one of the legal challenges to this even revised error. It is not worthy of a vote. Do not amend a bad bill.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
I ask for an aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 27. Measure passes. Mr. Speaker requests immediate transmittal to the governor. AB 121 without reference to file. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 121 by Assembly Committee on Budget and Action relating to the state budget to take effect immediately. Budget bill.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Madam Speaker, members, AB 121 contains two trigger reduction tiers in the event that the revenue forecast projections do not grow by at least $3 billion or $2 billion above the May revision forecast. The two trigger tiers are as follows. First, if the revenues fail to be at least $3 billion above the May revision forecast by January 1, $600 million in additional cuts will be triggered. These cuts include CSU, the University of California, and the Department of Developmental Services, each by $100 million. They also eliminate funding for state libraries and reduce the IHSS program by a third. Unfortunately, the painful list goes on, especially in the trigger scenario 2. If revenues fail to be at least $2 billion above the May revision forecast by January 1, we'll make $1.9 billion in cuts by reducing or authorizing the reduction of 7 school days, eliminating home-to-school transportation, and reducing the community college apportionment. We're not going gently into these cuts. They are truly a trail of tears. But our hand has been forced. As the last 6 months have shown, the votes for revenue extensions were not here, and we can't provide services with money that we just don't have. Fortunately, we have cause for hope that these cuts will not be triggered. Our economy is showing signs of life, beating revenue projections with each day. The good news is, as I'm sure you've all heard, the Department of Finance has projected an additional $1.2 billion in revenues above the May projection for this year alone, and we believe that those revenues will continue for the next year. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. You know, instead of a budget that contains triggers for cuts, why don't we have a plan to trigger those revenues? That's what we really need. We need to get serious about this. I look at this plan. You know, we've got taxes in here. We're taking on Amazon. We're killing off jobs with Amazon. We're killing off the redevelopment. That's 300,000 jobs. And yet we've got triggers for more cuts. And I think we need to take it seriously. I think we need to make it our business in this body to put California back to work and stop doing these Band-Aid type fixes and eliminate the rest of these taxes, because those are jobs that are on the line. I urge a no vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Blumenfield, you may close.
Yeah, I mean, I'm confused about how to respond. You're talking about, we're hearing complaints that we don't have enough cuts, and saying that complaining that we're having triggered cuts, that we should have triggered revenues. I mean, we tried to get revenues, but we weren't able to get the votes for those. Triggered or not triggered, I'm sure we'd be open to different revenue ideas if people were willing to put those on the table. But we've talked about this, what's actually happening in this bill, which is the triggered cuts, and I ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 27. Measure passes. Mr. Speaker requests immediate transmittal to the governor. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, members, on condition of the file, we're still waiting for AB 114, the education trailer bill. That has not been taken up by the Senate, but the Senate doesn't have it. It's still being tweaked. So it'll be some time, but hopefully not too long. But I wanted to give, Madam Speaker, you and the members of the House some status report in terms of where we are. It's the last trailer bill, I believe, to be taken up.
Okay, members, no passes will be given, but you're free to move about the cabin.
The House is back in session. Members, I'd like to announce that we're going to take a brief recess to allow for a dinner break and resume business at 9:15 p.m.